panels and different group kind of webinars since I think April 2020. So it's been over a year, but this is the first time we've actually done one specifically on integrative nutrition. And it's this is a landmark day really, because we know that nutrition is so important in our health, and people have different labels and concepts of what nutrition actually is. But at the end of the day, it's about nourishment, for your body, mind, and spirit. So just really happy to have everyone on today. And this is going to be a lot of fun. So thank you so much for joining us today. And since it is about lunchtime and we're talking about nutrition, I always like to say thank you so much to all of the attendees here for joining us during your lunchtime. And it is a valuable time for you. And hopefully this is going to be really helpful and of service to you today. So we can go on to a couple of minutes of community updates before launching into integrative nutrition. So we are doing a private Facebook community. You're all invited. You all can join us there. We have a lot of health articles, a lot of people asking questions. There's patients, there's clinicians, there's community members all around the world actually that are joining our community, and it's very vibrant. We're doing a yoga challenge right now. If anyone's interested in yoga, that's pretty interesting. We're just trying that out. But yeah, we'd love to have you there. It's facebook.com/groups/CIH community. So please join us there. I'd love to see you there. And we also have a hormone group visit. It is built to insurance. We've had a lot of people join for thyroid and adrenals in the last 2 weeks. Really been fun. Jen and I have been doing those visits. Araceli's been helping with the presentation, I believe, too, Araceli and Jen, but thyroid, adrenals. And then now we're going to do this upcoming Tuesday, May 18th from 1 to 2 p.m. estrogen and progesterone, which people think about as female sex hormones, but they're really present in both females and males. So it's relevant for everyone, any person. And then on May 25th, we're doing one on testosterone and DHEA, testosterone being another sex hormone, DHEA being an adrenal hormone, really critical for rejuvenation, recovery, and repair of the system. So we are doing that. Look forward to seeing you there. And then Liz Reese, our heart math instructor, is continuing with a series called De-stressing the nervous system. I think we all need that during this year, especially more now, but all times really. And she's doing a virtual heart math series with and I'll be in there on these for this series Wednesday from 4 to 5:15 p.m. So we have May 26th, June 2nd, and June 9th. And just a shout out to those who have done this 3-part series already. We also do have a heart math alumni group visit as well for those who have had some heart math and want to kind of continue building community, being in community, and to learn some more advanced techniques for heart math and how to manage your energy. Great. And then Jen has put the links for the Facebook group, the hormone group visit, and the heart math group visit here. So in May, we're in the second week of May for a webinar right now. Last week we had a professional forest bather, which was really great. At the Arboretum, Sage Rain Dancer was on, and so you can look at that on YouTube and Facebook. Today we have Holly, Araceli, and Jen talking about integrative nutrition and why food and nutrition nourishment is so important for your health and foundational for your health, essential. Next week, we have our friend, Dr. Fred Craigie, who's a PhD, and he has a real special interest and passion in spirituality, spiritual medicine, and how spirituality affects health. And then Thursday, May 27th, which is last Thursday in May, we have the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, whose name is Theodora Scarato, and she is an expert in 5G and how that may affect human health and what the research shows. So we're going to present a balanced view of that. So that's what's coming up this month. All right. And we are on to, I think we could talk first. Jen, do you want to lead this part and talk about it?
Sure. So this is meant to be a panel with the 3 of us, and we'd love to get your questions and comments about anything related to nutrition, but we thought we'd start off by sharing a little bit about ourselves and who we are and what we do. So the 3 of us are all nutritionists at CIH. Ayla, as Dr. Wong mentioned, should also get a shout out. She's on leave right now, but Ayla is also a nutritionist with us. So for myself, I initially got into nutrition actually through my undergrad when I was focusing more on psychology and neuroscience. I was really interested in depression, anxiety, and mental health. And I was really interested in like, where does it come from? Why is it happening? And through that process, I really figured out that it comes back to food in the gut in a lot of places. So that led me on a totally different path to becoming a nutritionist. So that's my general story. And then if Araceli or Holly want to share.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Araceli. Yeah, I got introduced to nutrition when I was very young through my own personal experience. I had a nutritionist since I was 6 for health heart issues. So basically, with that and just changing nutrition patterns, I was able to avoid heart medication and also heart surgery. And that's when I got more into functional medicine because I had to do a very strict type of fasting and supplements and include even enemas to try to like change the gut microbiome, and that really helped a lot preventing other further interventions regarding heart health. So that was really great for me, and that led me into nutrition and then functional medicine and integrative health.
Hi, I'm Holly. I started out sort of in a more conventional sense. I started out in lab research and developing diagnostics for infectious diseases. And I grew up on the standard American diet. So I don't have that kind of long-term, always been interested in nutrition, but I think I came to nutrition. It's kind of the way many people come to functional medicine, just through my own health struggles. And I was struggling with chronic migraines and a lot of anxiety and depression following the birth of my children. So I went to very well-intentioned doctors who put me on a lot of medication that helped the migraines, but caused a whole host of other issues. And through my own research, I ended up kind of finding a lot of balance in really overhauling my diet and really nourishing myself. And so I wanted to do, so I changed my career path and I ended up here.
Holly, thank you, Jen, Araceli, and Holly for the intros. And I think we've all come to nutrition and, professional ways and also deeply personal ways. I wanted to mention something funny came to my mind, so I had to share that. There's a doctor, this pioneer in orthomolecular medicine, which is a type of vitamin therapy. Actually did a quote. I thought this was a really funny quote. It said, he said, when a patient has seen 3 doctors but still doesn't feel well, then the answer is likely with nutrition. So that was funny. And I also have a personal story. I mean, I came to nutrition through probably my mom and dad. My dad owned a restaurant, and I could probably just eat whatever I wanted there. But I realized that certain foods made me feel really tired. Certain foods made me feel really energetic. So it's like, there's something to like eating, a ton of this type of food and, that type of food. And so that was one thing. My mom also was really into nutrition, and she was able to reverse her thyroid issues with eating more organically, eating cleanly, some exercise, and vitamin D. So that was very inspiring. And so that's how she raised us with a lot of healthy food and homemade food and things like that. So plus I just love food in general, but that is something. So yeah, we all have come to this. And in terms of integrative nutrition versus conventional nutrition, I think we should, that would be probably something basic to start with, because, we know that when we think about, someone as a doctor or someone as a nutritionist, like there's certain concepts that people may have of who a doctor is. What should they know? How should they act in terms of their, mindset and things like that, and what kind of body of knowledge they might have. What their perspective is. What do you feel like the difference is? I know this is a pretty deep question at the beginning, but I think it's probably good to set the table for the rest of the conversation. What is your perspective on, say, the difference between conventional nutrition and integrative nutrition, if there is a difference?
Again, for us, you mean that, right, Dr. Wang? Or you were just...
Yes.
I can start because I started on the very conventional pathway back as an RD in Peru, and I was working in hospitals and just doing like private visits on the more conventional side. And I think on that way of approaching nutrition, you do focus a lot on covering macronutrients and just like counting a lot and being more focused on that, more just, and on the side of like integrative medicine, you're really want to see like what's the root cause of what's happening, and not so much focusing on counting every single thing that we eat. That makes it really hard um, for it to be helpful, but just more looking at nutrients and being like what would help the root cause of any specific like condition, even if it's a GI condition or maybe hormone imbalances or really anything. Just trying to look at food as information and how that impacts our physiology and our genetics and things like that, more than just counting the macros.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is that like anything integrative, it's looking at you as a whole person, and making sure that we're taking into account your, what's your family life, who do you live with, what's your stress level like, what's your history with food, what's your culture, all of that kind of stuff we're taking into account. So we're not only looking at the goal that you have with your health and what food can do to serve that, but also everything else about you, because food is so personal and you have to eat every day, and there's so many things that will affect that experience for individual people.
Yeah, and I think too, looking at it from a more conventional sense, I guess conventional would be considered the registered dietitian. So that typically is more of an acute care type of nutrition where, it's very valuable in that space. But this is different in terms of it being more of a holistic approach, like Jen was saying, kind of taking into account all the different inputs into your health. And really, long-term wellness, it can, we're focusing on health and wellness versus necessarily being sick. So it can be useful in treating, different conditions, but it can also just be supportive in general.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. I think they're very valuable. Doing conventional nutrition, I worked at the hospital as well. A lot of great RDs there. You have to figure out where the tube feeds are coming from. They're recovering from strokes. Recovering from a lot of serious conditions, and that nutrition is really life-saving for them. So I think all modalities, all professions, and professionals and what they do are really valuable. And I think you kind of see that same way in conventional versus functional medicine, right? Conventional medicine is very much more acute, life-saving. If someone breaks a leg, you want to go to the ER, you want to get that surgery. If someone has a chronic condition that is not immediately life-threatening, but will be life-threatening in the future if it's not addressed, with the root cause, then that's where functional medicine, functional nutrition comes in as well. So yeah, that's great. And then yeah, Jen, you could leave this part off. Great.
Sure. So we have a bunch of different topics that we thought would be good to talk about, but if anyone listening has questions or comments, feel free. We'd love for this to be interactive. So we were going to start it off with this question, which is, what does it mean to use food as medicine? There's a famous quote out there about, let thy medicine be thy food. And I think that that's a really good place to start in terms of what nutrition can do and how we approach that. So do either of you want to start with that, or I can start with that?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the ways of thinking of food as medicine is how our foods can affect the expression of our genetics. So like the epigenetic effect of food in our health. So that is like expressed in different ways. So it's not only about the amount of calories. You can be having the same amount of calories of potato chips versus amount of calories on avocado, and that's going to be interpreted by our body completely different. So I think that's more like the information that food is giving to our body than just the amount that we're eating.
I think that's worth going over again, Araceli. That's a great point. What is epigenetics? Can we just explain to everyone, just in case people don't know what epigenetics is?
Right. So we can have like our DNA can make us in a higher risk to express certain diseases or certain conditions. But with food, we can either suppress these genes or like modify the expression of them so that you don't necessarily are destined to have those things. So of course, it depends on like which genes and how much, but probably Dr. One has a better way
No,
to.
I think that's pretty much. I mean, really, food is one of the primary ways that we turn off or turn on various inflammatory, anti-inflammatory genes, and so it's often food and lifestyle and things like toxic exposure or avoiding toxic exposure that will help move us from an inflammatory state to an anti-inflammatory state. So really the genes are only the potential for how we are able to express our health. But the epigenetics, which is epi means above the gene, so food is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, epigenetic influence that we have to actually express those genes in one way or the other. So someone could start out with a starting point. Like let's say, since we're talking about nutrition, let's talk about cake. I think cake. So if you're baking a cake, I mean, you have sugar, you have flour, you might have natural food coloring, you need some blueberries or something. You know, and what else is in cakes? Milk, eggs, various things. But you can make that cake in many ways. You know, it can be in like unlimited types of cakes. So you have a gene, you start out with the starting material of the genetics, but that can be made in different ways based on your lifestyle, based on your nutrition. So what that is really telling us as people is that we are much more empowered than we think. Our genes are not our destiny, and we can use nutrition. And I would say nutrition is the pillar, one of the main pillars for sure, if not the pillar of health, because of the powerful epigenetic influence that it has on our bodies.
I was going to also add that like the food as information idea is a really huge thing. And one part of that I think our society, since we've become more industrialized, has lost is our connection to the rhythms in nature and what's available in our area, and you know, what kind of food grows around you locally. Do you grow your own food? And more getting in touch with that and what your body is asking for. Because I think with health issues, you know, there are of course genetic things that are just, you know, actual genetic conditions that you cannot necessarily turn on or off. But then before, or not separate from that, your body will be giving you signs. It could start out with just some fatigue, skin issues, digestion. You know, there are going to be little things that will show up. And if you really get quiet and get in tune with what your body's asking for, you can connect back to food, and you know, your body will lead you down the road that you need to go. So I think using food as medicine is thinking about how can you become more intuitive about what your body is looking for, and how can you use food as a tool to get you to the place that it's trying to get you to go to. So that's another perspective on it.
Yeah, and I think building on that, kind of being in tune with what your body wants, another way that food can be really supportive beyond the science of like the nutrients and how they're building blocks and for our bodies and, you know, information. I think just looking at food as a way to connect with other people, because I think that's such a huge part of our health is, you know, finding a sense of community and connection with others, because food is tradition, it's joy, you know, we use it for celebration. So I think that's another important aspect of using food as medicine.
Yes, and just going to the research, and this is about tea and water, but there's actually interesting study that shows if you want to, like, as you're inviting a guest into your home or whatnot, and maybe this happens post-COVID here, right? Inviting guests into your home, you offer them a warm beverage. If you offer them a warm beverage, that actually relaxes them. It increases the vagus nerve and things. It's like, oh, I belong here. Like it's like you're sitting around a campfire, you know, kind of thing. Okay, I'm going to share my food with you, that kind of thing. So that's really a nice way to connect with people, is offer them a beverage, offer them some food. And like Holly said, that's just a huge way to, you know, connect with others, build community, and that's a huge part of our health, for sure.
Awesome. Could we go to the next one?
Sure, and there are some questions that we could get to that are related. So Leslie said, are some foods good for certain health problems, but not for others? So if you have a few different conditions, what takes priority? It's a good question. I guess that's where you should work with someone one-on-one, but I'd say generally a lot of health conditions come down to the same principles in general, which I would say are to focus on more eating real food and avoiding processed food and focusing on lots of color and variety as like super generalities. And then within that, there are certain conditions, like let's just say you have a gut problem and you're also trying to lose weight, you could have issue with eating like healthier foods if you have a gut problem. So that's where it becomes more individualized, where you'd work with somebody. But in general, I think health with food all boils down to some principles that pretty much everyone will agree on. That is eating real food, make it colorful, those sorts of things. I don't know if you all have any thoughts on that.
Right, and I would just add that on those specific therapeutic food plans that you have to do for periods of time, if there's any like GI or food sensitivities or like histamine intolerance, hopefully those are periods of time while you go through treatment, while you're trying to figure out what's the root cause, or if there's any intestinal permeability involved, or if there's bacterial overgrowth or things like that. And once that's better, you should be able to start reintroducing if you've eliminated some foods that are healthy overall, like real whole foods that are good, um, rich in phytonutrients. Welcome.
Great.
Many other questions in the chat, Jenna? I cannot see them on my.
Oh yeah, sure. So, and actually we can take the screen down for a little bit and answer some of these questions, and then maybe come back to the slides. So someone else, Lisa said, how accurate are the at-home tests for food sensitivities? She just did the Everly Well test. Anybody want to do that one? Can talk about it.
Yeah. Do you want to? Yeah. You don't want to take it, or
Go for it, Sugar.
I'll try. I'll try. I'll try to answer that. Since so at-home sensitivity testing for food sensitivities, I think that usually companies have their own data on it for sure. The question of how accurate that is, I think there is a question about that. I mean, definitely there's different types of food sensitivities as well. There's things like IgG, there's IgA, there's C3D, which is complement 3D. There's also what's called mediator release testing. There's tests that look at the white blood cell reactions to different foods. At the end of the day, the food sensitivity test can be useful for a subset of people, but you have to realize the limitations, which is that you always have to correlate any functional test, including food sensitivity tests, with the clinical conditions that you might have. So if someone has a sensitivity to, let's say, I'll give you an example of salmon, right? If someone has a salmon sensitivity on the test, but then when you talk to that person, say, well, you know what, I feel great when I eat salmon, right? I feel great. Maybe I have some skin rashes or maybe I have some joint pain, but I don't feel bad when I eat salmon. Then that might be an issue more with increased intestinal permeability, which is called leaky guts. Increased zonulin, which is the protein that helps to control the opening and closing of the tight junctions in the small intestine, let's say. So what that means is that you have to figure out with the person you're working with, is it really a food sensitivity that someone's having inflammation to that food, or do they have inflammation because of the leaky guts, which will cause multiple food sensitivities? So you really want to work with a clinician on that, ideally, because otherwise you're just kind of going off the test. And the general mantra is you don't usually want to go off of only test alone. You want to go off of, how you're feeling, how your symptoms are. So typically we do often recommend different types of nutrition plans, and try that first before testing, but sometimes we do testing, like more professional testing. But yeah, any other thoughts on it? Those are kind of just some random thoughts on it.
I think that's good.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is I know nutrition is confusing and some people just want give me a black and white roadmap. So I think if you want a starting place, food sensitivity testing is good. The one hesitation with it is a lot of times it does just send you right back to working on the gut, like Dr. Wong was saying. So that tends to be a place to start in general.
Yes, and now one more slightly nuanced answer to that is if you have a gut issue and you're working on it and you have a gut microbiome test, let's say, or you're working on, clearing out gut infections or whatnot, and you have a food sensitivity test, if it's not too overwhelming for you, and that's the big thing, is that as long as it's not too overwhelming for you to do all those things at one time, in theory, eliminating some of those foods for a certain period of time would cause less stress, I think, to your gut, and so that might allow for more accelerated healing of the gut if you do like a gut treatment, leaky gut treatment, let's say, and eliminate certain foods that might be inflammatory to your system based on that test. If you do that at the same time and you're not overwhelmed by that, that could be helpful for you. But that's a big asterisk. So still, that you got to just make sure you're not being overwhelmed by that.
And I think Jen had a related question. She said, did you say that there is an accurate test to diagnose leaky gut?
Not perfect, but but just if you measuring sonulin on the stool test, there's a functional stool test where you can measure sonulin. It's not a perfect test, but it's measuring basically if there's too much of the sonulin, that's the protein that is linking the cells together. If that's too high, it means probably the tight junctions have been broken down, and that leads to more intestinal permeability.
Great. Okay, so we'll head to the next question. Lisa said, I'm also curious about your thoughts on intermittent fasting. I hear all sorts of different ways of doing it, how effective it is, what is helpful for a lot of information. So what do you all think about intermittent fasting?
I'll put the slide on that. Great.
Yeah.
Anyone wants to start?
Sure, I'll start. So I think like the general answer that we'll probably give is that it could be different for everyone, but I think meal spacing and being more intentional about when you eat can be a very useful tool for a lot of reasons. And fasting can look a lot of different ways. Like you could be doing well, I guess the super foundational level would be just doing main meals with a very limited snacking and keeping a 12-hour break between dinner and breakfast. So if you eat breakfast at 7 a.m., dinner's by 7 p.m., nothing after that. That's a nice, good place to start with meal spacing. And then I think true intermittent fasting is when you are doing more 14 to 16 or longer stretches of fasting. And that definitely is something that you would need to figure out for yourself. Where do you see results and where do you get benefit, and where is it also sustainable? So that's something that I know we definitely talk about a lot with patients is, what is your lifestyle like? What's your family schedule? What's realistic for you to do? But there are, for weight loss, for example, definite benefits for improving insulin resistance. And then for gut health, in terms of giving your system a break and having some time in the day where you're not eating. So in general, I would say it is a good thing. It just depends for you, what is good for your body, how long, how often.
Can I have some possibly funny things to say here. First of all, I'm intermittent fasting right now for about 20 hours, so hopefully I'm still coherent on this. But I kind of want to call it natural nutrition instead of intermittent fasting. I think intermittent fasting is such a buzzword now. We're probably going to have a group visit on intermittent fasting because that's what people know it as. But if you think about the Paleolithic times, ancestral times, we didn't have a 24/7 Wegman. We didn't have a 24/7 7-Eleven. I think someone told me now that 7-Elevens, which used to be open from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. are now open 24/7, right? I think that's true. Maybe not. So the idea is that we are really constantly feasting, like that. We're basically, if you think about the standard American diet and the standard American diet lifestyle, which is really more I think it's not the diet only, it is the lifestyle. It's like we're always eating. We're watching football games, or we're watching TV, the latest reality shows. We're usually not exercising at that time, and we're probably stressed out, cramming the food in. So that's like intermittent fasting under a constant state of stress. Intermittent feasting, I should say. So this fasting feasting cycle, which is more natural in nature, like in nature we hunt and we gather fruits and vegetables and maybe plant crops or something, but there's times of feast and there's times of famine. So if you mimic that cycle to some degree, that could be really helpful. But if you're super stressed out, or if you're super tired and fatigued, that's usually not a good time to intermittent fast. Mm-hmm. So if there's adrenal or thyroid issues, like I think we talked about last couple of weeks for people, this is not the time to do intermittent fasting. So there's a few other people. I don't know. We usually talk about who shouldn't intermittent fast. Like pregnant women may not want to intermittent fast. Kids shouldn't because they're growing. So this is kind of the people that should not do that.
And one more I wanted to add is, if by any reason you know that you have a higher, or do you know that you have like heavy metal toxicity or exposure to toxins, intermittent fasting could be okay, but not doing very long fasts, because then you start using too much of the fat tissue where a lot of the toxins can be stored, and that can be a little hard on the detox process. So probably trying to work first on the detox and stimulating detox, and then doing more of the fasting. But it definitely improves, like has GI benefits and metabolic benefits. So I think for healthy individuals would be something good to, and if there's any specific conditions, probably talking with the provider to make sure it's the right fit for you as well.
The other one I would add is eating disorders. Like if there's something having like a restricted time schedule, that's something you may want to avoid too.
Yeah, people that have eating disorders or even a history of eating disorder, you really want to be cautious about that, or maybe not do intermittent fasting because that might trigger a rebound there. Yeah, that's good.
Great.
And I
Any
think, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna see if we wanted to talk about timing of meals, meaning like with the fasting, for example, you can either fast where it extends late into the morning, where maybe your first meal is around 11 a.m. or noon, or there's another version of fasting where you would stop eating earlier in the evening. So maybe your last meal is at 4 p.m. or something, or 6 p.m. It doesn't have to be 4 p.m. And if there's a difference in that. So I was just gonna say that I think with insulin resistance in particular, if you're really trying to work on metabolic health, the late night eating is a really big hurdle to get over. So meaning if you avoid late night eating, it will really help to improve insulin sensitivity. So you want to try to stop your meals earlier rather than going later into the next day.
Right. And there was the next question that was also related, also talks about using fats as fuel, and like by lowering the carbs. And these can also help the fasting because it lowers your insulin baseline. So when your insulin is lower, you have a higher chance of using those fats as energy instead of the glucose. So definitely the intermittent fasting is a good addition for that, for lowering the insulin and using more fats as fuel. Great. Do we want to go? Let me stop the share. Should we go back on other of the questions, or there's anything else on the
There might be more later, but let's go back to the slides just so we can make sure we get through that too. I think there's a couple.
Okay. So how can nutrition support gut health?
It's a can of worms. So many.
Is this the meat of the talk or the vegetable?
Probably the vegetable.
Vegetable, okay.
Well, I think to start, maybe we could answer a question that was entered in here, which is there a connection between food sensitivities and autoimmune diseases or autoimmune conditions? So short answer would be yes. For autoimmunity, there usually is some sort of a trigger, and in some cases that is a food trigger. So that is where you get more into food sensitivities. And for example, some of the most common food sensitivities would be things like gluten, dairy, and you can get into others for sure, like eggs, corn, soy, the list can go on. So for some autoimmune conditions, a really good example would be Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune hypothyroidism. There's a phenomenon called molecular mimicry, where your immune system will mistake gluten protein for thyroid tissue. And so the immune system is reacting to the gluten, but it looks a lot like thyroid tissue. And so your immune system reacts or is attacking the thyroid tissue. So even in that small example, you can see how food proteins can definitely play a role in creating an immune response. And sometimes that can be a part of autoimmunity too. So that's a big topic. And Kim, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Kim, yeah, let's answer her question is good. I think there was one other question. They're both about food sensitivity, so that's probably good to talk about both of those.
Yeah. So Kim said, what are the symptoms of food sensitivities?
And then Talk said, is there a connection between food sensitivities and autoimmune conditions? Yes, there is a connection.
Yes, and the symptoms can vary a lot, from fatigue, headaches, or rashes, or GI symptoms, including like bloating, gas, or abdominal pain. So it definitely the best way to actually realize, like notice if these symptoms are connected to food sensitivity, is eliminating the food for at least 23 days and then reintroducing in its simple form to actually see if these symptoms are being triggered by the food. Even if you have like a food sensitivity test showing that those are high, it will probably be better to do a trial of elimination and then reintroduction and see if that was one of the reasons why you were getting those symptoms, but definitely can vary. And how do we want to approach this question that it could be approached in so many ways? Who wants to give it a start?
What was the question?
How can nutrition support gut health?
Oh, yeah. Holly, what do you think?
Yeah, well, and put me on the spot. It's a really big, broad topic. So kind of to give a general answer, maybe we can kind of, if you think of anything more specific from there, we can go from there. But I would say, you know, on the flip side, nutrition or lack of nutritious foods and eating more processed foods can cause actual damage to your intestinal tract. And eating kind of a well-balanced, varied diet that's kind of rich in fruits and vegetables, whole grains, if you're tolerating them, quality proteins, quality fats, they all have components that not only feed the microbiome in your intestinal tract, but they also can provide nutrients and energy for the cells of your intestinal tract and keep them healthy as well. And so I think, you know, that's kind of the general answer. When it comes to fruits and vegetables, they provide specific fibers for the bacteria that are beneficial to our health, that live in our gut. So having plenty of those to kind of help support their growth and keep them there. Eating probiotic foods like fermented vegetables or yogurt or miso all can be really supportive of that as well. Yeah.
No, that's good. Just one thing I was gonna add is that our gut microbiome is so diverse that they sort of like prefer a variety of food. So as much as we can rotate the type of like vegetables and the colors and the types of foods that we're eating, is also really beneficial for the commensal bacteria in our gut. And just if you're having like irregularity of the bowels or experiencing too much gas or bloating, it's always better to rule out small intestinal bacterial overgrowth first, and then if that's not a problem, definitely fiber and vegetables and nuts, seeds are definitely great for the gut microbiome. And as Holly mentioned, the fermented foods are also great.
Yeah, this idea that we're eating for ourselves is potentially, I wouldn't say it's an illusion because we are eating for ourselves, you know, but we also can think of it as we're eating for our friends in our colon. You know, the 30 trillion, it's like 30 to 100 trillion different bacteria that are in our colon that in large part help to determine our health or influence our health. So we're really eating for them also. And so that's why we're eating, like, I think both, like all of us said, you know, eating a variety of fruits and vegetables as tolerated, as long as you don't have SIBO or something, then you can really diversify. Diversifying your food is going to diversify your microbiome, which is generally going to be healthy for you. In terms of that comment I had about carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, you need all those building blocks of health for your cells, your enzymes. So protein is going to be helpful for the nitrogen. And that's why a lot of times you can't just eat foods that are going to increase the carbon and hydrogen. You have to increase that. You got to make sure you get enough protein, whether that's animal or plant-based protein.
Mm-hmm.
The other thought that comes to mind is not just what you're eating, but how you're eating. I think with gut health, that's an extremely important area, but it's important really for everything. So in particular, like if you're eating a really good balanced diet, lots of fiber, or even if you're just eating anything, it's important that you really slow down and chew thoroughly and stimulate your digestion, and make sure that you're not in fight or flight and you're instead in rest and digest. So if you think about it, most people, including I think probably all of us, will sit here and eat lunch while we're working, or you're multitasking while you're trying to eat. And while that is necessary, sometimes you're not really giving your body the chance to get into the rest and digest state. So a good contrast example is to think if you've been to a restaurant, maybe pre-COVID, and you know that feeling when you're really anticipating the food coming, you're seeing the food in the room, you're smelling all the smells, you're really ready to digest. And ideally, most of your meals should be more of that kind of experience. I know that's more about an ideal world scenario, but you can create that experience by taking a few moments to notice the colors in your food, smell it, get excited, and then, take some deep belly breaths to get into rest and digest. So that's another big thing with gut health I think is important.
Yeah, that's a really great point. and beyond that, I think we talk a lot about, the good bacteria and the bad bacteria in our gut, but, I don't know if we've really touched on why the good bacteria are good and why we actually want them there. So just kind of a little bit of information kind of in that vein. So the bacteria that we consider the good bacteria actually, when they're in the appropriate amounts and ratios to each other, can help keep us from getting infections of an overgrowth of opportunistic bacteria or viruses or yeast. So they kind of help keep things in check, and they also as they're feeding on the food that we're eating, they create substances that are beneficial. They're called short chain fatty acids, and they're very healing and provide energy for our intestinal tract as well. And even beyond that, they some of them can make vitamin K, which then we absorb and we can utilize in our body. So they provide a lot of benefit to our health overall.
Yes. Okay, big topic here. How can nutrition support mood, such as anxiety, depression, or low energy? So I could give a start here with Dr. Juan. We've been getting more into this and how like nutrition therapy can affect mental health. And there's specific nutrient balance that can affect how neurotransmitters are being. It's not only about the amount of neurotransmitters, but also how much we are reuptaking and how much is really available to have the effect. So one thing is the gut is really important. So having a healthy gut and nutrition, as we mentioned, is really important for gut health. Healthy gut, because there's like some research that shows like even 90% of the serotonin made in the gut. So definitely keeping a gut healthy will support mood and mental health, but also making sure our nutrients are in balance. For example, the copper and the zinc. We don't want to have like too much copper compared to zinc. We want to keep that into a 1-to-1 ratio, because higher copper can definitely lead to things like anxiety, for example. And also things related, I don't want to get too technical on that, but also like methylation status and like how your methylation is working, that could also be affected by nutrients like B vitamins or methionine, that is an amino acid, and things like that would affect like our mental health and how we're feeling. So definitely a lot to do with nutrition to support our mental health, and of course energy with the adrenals, but I'll leave it to someone else.
Well, I like to call them gut transmitters now instead of neurotransmitters, because serotonin 90%, like Araceli was saying, is made in the gut, and then 50% of dopamine is made in your gut. So the other thing about mood, I like to say a lot, is how the brain is 60% fat. So we need those healthy fats in there. And a lot of times back in the 1970s, that's just this idea of fat is bad. We should all eat like low fat crackers all the time or something, right? And that's basically that's been shown in a lot of clinical trials and studies to be sort of not a good way to eat. It's just eating a low fat diet, especially low fat, and then basically unhealthy carbohydrates, processed foods, things like that, and maybe the food fats that people are eating in that type of plan would be not good fats and more inflammatory fats. So definitely from that perspective as well, it can really help support your brain health and your overall building blocks of the brain. Nutrition can do that.
Any other thoughts, or we can go to the next one?
Yeah, I think that there's just a general idea that a lot of our mood can sometimes even be related to nutrient deficiencies, like on a very fundamental level. So sometimes making sure that your diet is more nutrient dense can make a big difference. So this is the contrast between having enough calories versus having enough nutrients. So you could be eating plenty of calories, but your food may actually not be giving you all of the vitamins and minerals that your body is looking for. So that's a very starting place that you could begin with. And then I think another layer is, are there certain foods that your body may be responding to, and the way it's showing up is in some cases anxiety or depression. So that's more of the food sensitivity idea, where you could do either a test or an elimination diet, because for some people there is a big connection with food and mood in that regard. And then I think the third layer would be looking at the gut and seeing if there is a fundamental issue there, like if it's an overgrowth of bad bacteria or something along those lines that could be interacting, having the gut-brain axis and improving that. So those are the three main places that I think are a good starting place.
And I think one more kind of foundational piece to it is, and it kind of, all of these, topics like reducing your simple carbohydrates and having quality fat and protein and fiber and kind of balancing your meals in that way. It all kind of feeds into your blood sugar regulation. And if your blood sugar is all over the place, that can also impact your mood. So being able to balance your blood sugar with a more kind of solidly balanced diet is also going to be foundational, even before I think you start to look at all the other more detailed options.
That's a really good point. I think that's probably one of the more common issues that people have.
Yeah.
Here's a fun one.
Juicy question.
Is there one best diet?
A hot topic.
Everybody get your
my
mitts
mouth
out to
is
fight.
watering. My mouth is watering from even these icons of the foods. Yeah, the delicious juicy olives there.
Yeah, you can all probably chat on the chat box if there's anyone that you have a preference on or that you are currently
Yeah,
on.
what are your votes? Yeah, I'm curious. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Anybody want to start with this?
Sure, I would probably say that there's definitely not a one best diet for everyone. I think it's definitely very individualized on what works better for you. There's general recommendations that will probably be good for most people, like lowering the simple sugars. Simple sugars are very like addictive, like increases a lot the insulin and creates imbalances of our blood sugar that really can affect so much our metabolic health. So I think there's certain things like increasing vegetables and lowering sugar that is pretty general for everyone, and like eating whole real foods that I think I wouldn't say no one needs like a specific like just processed foods would be something not that we wouldn't necessarily recommend. But on that spectrum of like general recommendations, there could be certain variations like pescatarian or vegetarian, or doing more keto if you prefer going even not only the sugars, but even lowering further on the carbs if that benefits you specifically. But if you have like hypoglycemia, maybe not so much. So that becomes a little more like specific on preferences and health and things like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of nuance between each of these and how, why certain people might follow one over the other. But I think in general, if all of these diets that are listed here are done kind of in the right way with quotes, but if they're done in the right way, they have some commonalities. They, especially like even with keto, people think you're eating bacon and eggs all day, but really a more healthful way to do that is to have non-starchy vegetables. And if you have fruit, eat lower glycemic fruits, and balance it with some quality protein and healthy fats. And so all of these, like all across the board, I think most people are going to benefit. I mean, unless you have, SIBO, which then you may have some reactions to these, but like benefit from, non-starchy vegetables is kind of a foundation for each meal. And then, add in other proteins and fats as needed.
I think another important thing is like, it's very easy, I think, to become attached to labels and to make a diet an identity, which can be helpful, like in some scenarios, to have a community around what you're doing and if you want support. But I think it's important to have flexibility and to understand that your body's needs will change. What you needed as a baby versus a 13-year-old versus however old you are now and however old you will be, it's going to change over time. And depending on how stressed you are, what's your activity level, things will change, and gut health, etc. So I think it's important to have an open mind and realize that there are certain diets that people will be big advocates for. That's because for who they are and what they're experiencing right now, that probably is very helpful for them, but it doesn't mean that it's the end all be all. And I think you could say that about any diet, really.
Awesome. Oh, we covered the intermittent fasting, so then we can move to thyroid. So we touched a little bit on this when Jen was mentioning on autoimmune disease and how some foods can trigger this when there's leaky gut present. So that's one way I would say food, like eliminating some foods that are like triggering antibodies against thyroid. Like typically the two main ones are gluten and dairy, could be helpful if autoimmune thyroid is present. But in general, we know that the backbone for thyroid hormones is iodine. So definitely making sure that your iodine levels are in a good level. We don't want too much iodine or too little iodine. And iodine comes from foods from the ocean, mainly algae. So things like wakame seaweed or kelp flakes would be like good sources of iodine. That would be one thing. And then converting the inactive T4 hormone to active T3, we need both zinc and selenium. So making sure those two are also on a good level would help thyroid health. Anything else that we wanted to mention, or we can go to the next one?
I think maybe go to the next one because I think it's adrenals, if I know correctly, and that kind of connects back to thyroid. I think that a lot of times we don't think about the system. We tend to kind of focus on like, here's my thyroid number, but we're not necessarily looking at what else is going on. And the adrenals are often imbalanced, or there's some kind of HPA axis dysfunction when the thyroid is also imbalanced. So one of the commonalities with eating, I think, is making sure that you're balancing your plate. This is like one of the things we talk about, I think, every day, all day to people, because the idea is when you balance your plate, you're balancing your hormones. So the general concept is that you want to make sure you're including some protein, some healthy fats, and some fiber at every meal. And I think for both thyroid and adrenals, protein is very important because it just is going to help to keep your adrenals more stable. And then it also provides some of the nutrients that your thyroid is going to need to function properly. So just protein, fat, fiber. That's like a great mantra to remember for just general eating.
Awesome. So I think this is the last one, how to handle eating healthy with picky eaters in the family. How I approach this?
I can do it. This is actually before I came to CIH, I worked with families a lot. So I have a couple strategies. The first thing that I would say is if your child is really picky, before you try to force them or not offer anything else that they're willing to eat, be sure that they don't have some sort of functional issue, because sometimes with picky eating, there's like an actual like functional issue with chewing or swallowing. And so occupational therapy can be really helpful for that. So that's, if you think that your child might not eat for, days at a time because that they're that strictly rejecting food that you want them to eat, then that would be kind of, something that you should investigate. But beyond that, if you don't have any concerns with that respect, really one of the best things you can do is to model the behaviors that you want to see. And so, trying new foods in front of your kids and letting them see you try them. And even if you don't like it, saying, oh, well, I don't like it, but maybe I'll try it again and prepare it in a different way. When they can see you model that behavior, that's really one of the best things you can give them as they're learning, and recognizing that it will take time and it's really a long game. It's not like you're going to just have something in place and they're going to start eating anything you want. So one of the best resources that I have found is Ellen Satter's Institute. I believe it's ellensatter.org, and I can put it in the chat, I think. Her name is Ellen Satter. And she's a researcher, and she created the division of responsibility. And so the way that it works is that parents have certain roles in feeding kids and children have certain roles in eating. So your role as a parent is to decide what's being served at a meal, what time and where. And your child's role is to decide from what's being served what they want to eat and how much. And then that's their responsibility. We don't make a comment on how much they're eating or what they're choosing to eat. And over time, by introducing foods, even if it's just sitting on the table in front of them, it will start to become familiar to them. And if you are willing to be patient and wait, it might take 20 or more introductions to a food before a child really, truly accepts it. But that's really kind of a basic structure for feeding that can be really helpful. It takes the pressure off. It kind of removes a lot of the fighting over, what children are or aren't eating and what you want for them. And so that I've had a lot of families use that and have success with that.
Great, thank you.
I know another thing, this is probably something that people have thought about before and is out there, but just getting kids involved, like if you have the space or the ability to have a garden or even like a little windowsill garden, just because they'll get to see the food grow, it'll get them much more interested and wanting to be involved and wanting to try the food. So that's another good area to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, sorry, I have a cat here who's making noise. Yeah, and that's kind of building off of that. Another way to get your kids involved is to like take them to the grocery store with you. I know that can make life a little bit more difficult when you have them kind of in tow at the store, but let them say, I want to try a new vegetable this week, and let them be the ones who decide what the new vegetable is, because then you still are in control, but they feel like they have some control too. So it's another.
Jen had a good comment, Jen on the webinar. So if my child likes to eat ketchup by the spoonful without the accompanying burger, do I just let her be?
Well, you could take the ketchup and put it in a bowl and say, this is how much ketchup we have tonight. And that's what you're serving. That's what you're choosing to serve. And if that's what she eats that whole little serving bowl, then that's her choice. But then there's other food, if she's still hungry, that she can then have. So again, it kind of comes down to you have the control over what you're serving. So you can serve just like if your child would eat whatever all night, just make it a small serving is what you have on the table for them to eat.
Yeah, there's a couple food groups in ketchup, right? There's some vegetables in there, maybe. I don't know. Ketchup by the US food pyramid. Yeah, true. It's more of a fruit. That's true. The seeds. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we're getting close to 1 o'clock, so we really appreciate everybody having lots of interaction and question. We'll hopefully be able to do this again sometime.
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending, participating. We know that nutrition is a huge part of health. And thank you so much for coming today. We'll see you next week.
Thank you all.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.